It's important to have an entity like the Center for Safe and Secure Schools available because our core mission is to support the local school district's efforts to have safe and secure learning environments. Research has shown that if children are not safe in the learning environment, it's difficult for them to learn at their highest levels. We are specialists. This is all we do, is focus on safety and security and how we can support our school districts to have those environments that are conducive to high achievement and student learning. My staff has a school-based background. For example, I have over 30 years in education. I've been in the classroom and I've also been in the boardroom as a superintendent of schools. I look for employees who have had school-based experience because they have lived, walked, and talked and understand the day-to-day operations of a school district. And this is important. It helps our credibility when we go out and talk about what we do for school districts because we understand the environment and the situations they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. First of all, the statute, Chapter 37, 108, and 109 requires every public school system or district in the state of Texas to conduct safety audits every 3 years. When we go out on a safety audit, it's a comprehensive audit. We look at 5 areas. We do an intruder assessment where we try to enter the facility illegally outside of the normal visitors protocol. We do an exterior assessment where we check all of the outside entrances. We look at the doors and assess their strength and resistance to break in. We look at portable buildings. We look at all the fields. If they have a stadium on the site, we also assess the stadium. In addition to that, we look at the signage in the parking lots, the surveillance coverage, what kind of security do they have that protects the outside perimeters? Are all the doors locked? Can they be accessed by a key from the outside? And do they have lettering, for example, that in case of an emergency, when first responders come, can they see that lettering from the streets? And this allows us first responders to get to that site quickly because they have the doors and the exits clearly identified. Also, we look at an interior assessment. In the interior assessment, we look at the science lab, the cafeteria, we look at classrooms. Do they have evacuation routes clearly labeled? Are the teachers able to lock their doors from the inside as opposed to having to step outside and lock their doors? Do they have the appropriate signage inside the building? Evacuation routes clearly identified in case of an emergency. So it's a very thorough interior assessment. We also look at NIMS, which stands for the National Incident Management System. It's a framework for organizing your emergency plans and responding to crisis situations. We want to know if they have a safety committee in place. Have they met? Do the committee members know their respective roles? Have they practiced those? How frequently have they met? Have they had training with this safety committee? And have they met with first responders? Do they understand the incident command system process? And if they do, is it well established at that campus? We also finally look at their policy. Policy refers to what is the policy for responding to an emergency? What is the policy for dealing with an intruder? We want to know if those policies are in writing. Have they been disseminated to the staff? Does the staff understand how to respond to different crises that could possibly come up in the school environment? Yes, they're required by law. Chapter 37, 108 of the Texas Education Code requires every public school district to conduct a safety audit every 3 years. Some districts choose to have it done by a third party, which we recommend because of the objectivity that it brings and the consistent assessment standards that are in place. But some choose to do it internally with a cross-section of team members coming from different disciplines in the school district. But to answer your question, every public school district is required to do a safety audit, conduct safety audit of all their facilities every 3 years. Initially, when the Center for Safe and Secure Schools was started, or since its inception, it had a core mission of supporting school districts in the area of emergency operations planning. So our big core services back in those days were around conducting safety audits, helping to develop and review emergency operations plans at districts. Since I've come on board 3 years ago, we have evolved into where now, in addition to those core services, we also look at the school environment, the climate. We actually go in and do threat assessments. We go in and help school districts and schools with their climate and culture at the site. We work with teachers on how to implement restorative practices and build strong, positive, healthy relationships with students and with adults. So we've evolved now into doing on-site training for school districts in the area of restorative practices. We also take our NIMS classes to the school site and do customized training to help administrators become certified in the National Incident Management System. Clearly, the biggest challenge right now is how can we harden the school site so that it is not a soft target for people to come in and do harm to our children. The Parkland incident in Florida is a classic example of where we are today. Unfortunately, we're there today where we have to make sure that we take all the steps necessary to harden the site, to make it less easier for a person to come in and do harm to our children. Internally, we want to make sure that we're doing a good job of making connections with kids who may seem to be a little disconnected or can have a sense that they are on the edge or they're dealing with trauma and stresses. One big area now of focus in schools is dealing with social and emotional learning. We can no longer just be concerned with the academic achievement of a student. We also have to be concerned with the whole student, his social and emotional development. We have to bring that along concurrently with the academic development of that student. EOP stands for Emergency Operations Plans, and by statute and the Texas Education Code, every public school district is required to have emergency operations plans for each of their sites. An emergency operation plan basically deals with 4 areas. It talks about how we're going to prevent or mitigate a situation that may be injurious to my staff and students from occurring. If it does occur, then how are we going to respond? That emergency operations plan should explain how we're going to respond to emergencies. Then once you respond to an emergency, how are you going to recover from it? And then finally, what are you going to do in the future to hopefully prevent this from happening? You need to have an after-action review or some type of system in place where you can sit down and review that incident and talk about what went well and what are areas where we need improvement. Communication. Number one is that they need to let parents know throughout the year and on an ongoing basis, here are the things we're doing for school safety. When each year districts send home a student handbook, and in that handbook, in addition to the code of conduct, should be information concerning safety protocols at that child's particular campus. So communication is the key, whether you do that by a newsletter going out on a frequent basis or doing some type of open house, and at the open house you have a meeting with parents. But that kind of information needs to be ongoing, and it should be a constant for a school district and a school campus to be communicating with their parents concerning school safety. Also, anytime you have an incident that's out of the ordinary, whether it's a bomb threat or children now with social media, most of them have cell phones. It's critical that as soon as something happens out of the ordinary, that the campus administration is sending home some type of information that explains the situation and the response of the school or the school district. Teachers are. They're, I wouldn't say necessarily as stressed out. It is a big concern for them. We stress a lot. As a former administrator myself, I know the importance of having a classroom that is orderly. One of the effective correlates of effective schools is to have a safe and orderly learning environment. And if that classroom is in disarray, or it's in a situation where the behavior is not conducive to learning, students are not going to do a good job of learning. They're not going to feel safe, and it's going to be so chaotic that student achievement is going to suffer. So school safety is job number one in the school business. And with classrooms and with teachers, it's a very serious concern. That one has a lot of strong emotions with it. Personally, I think that we have to be careful with that particular idea. It needs to be discussed and vetted well. For some rural districts, it may make sense because of the amount of time it takes for first responders to get to the site. Whereas here in the inner city, in the Houston area, many of our schools have armed commissioned officers already on campus, and the response time typically is 3 minutes or less. So I think it's going to be left up to the local educational agency to make that determination. I think it is a local district decision that needs to be discussed and looked at in the context of, what's best for our district and our situation. Restorative discipline can help acts reduce and possibly mitigate acts of aggression because it focuses on relationships. Restorative practices is about inclusion as opposed to exclusion. In the situation in Parkland, the student that committed this atrocity was disconnected from the school community. He had been expelled because of previous behavior that they felt was unsafe for him to be in the school setting. But still, that doesn't deal with the root cause of this person's problem. As you could see, he chose to come back and enter the school setting even though he had been expelled from school. So just putting a kid out or suspending him is not necessarily the answer. The answer is to try to get to the root cause of that child's behavior. And restorative practices creates an intentional setting in the schools, at the school site, where students and teachers can sit down together and learn about each other, get to know each other, and deal with the thorny issues that may come up. The idea behind restorative practices is that it takes a whole community to educate a child. So in the restorative setting, you're sitting down together as a learning community and talking about issues that are important to you. So it's an intentional way of building positive relationships with kids that keeps them connected and reduces the opportunity sometimes for them to go unnoticed or be ignored. From a safety audit standpoint, last year was a great year for us. We worked with 8 of our school districts out of the 25 in the area, so we impacted close to, I'd say, indirectly 300,000 kids, because when you go out and do an audit of all their school sites, that's helping those kids to have a safe and secure learning environment. Statewide, we've worked with districts outside of the region, Beaumont ISD, Round Rock ISD. These are big school districts. Internally here, we work with Spring Branch, A-Leaf, Goose Creek, Humble ISD, and these are very large school districts. So the impact that we're having is very significant in terms of being able to go out and help school districts ensure that their campuses are safe. The Center for Safe and Secure Schools has been around since 1999, and we're excited about our role today. Our role has become very important in light of the recent events that have happened at some school districts. Certainly we live in different times today, and to have a Center for Safe and Secure Schools like we have here in the Harris County area is certainly a plus. and we look forward to continuing to grow our services, and we would encourage all school districts to take advantage of our services and the different skill sets that we bring to the table here as experts in this area. So we're excited about the future for us and the possibilities of working with our school districts in a greater way to have safe and secure learning environments where teachers can teach and students can learn.